Hi, welcome to the latest episode of NAMI-NYS Perspectives, your show to keep you connected, supported, and inspired as we navigate the COVID-19 crisis. And today, we have a very special guest with us, a dear member of the NAMI-NYS family. He's one of the inaugural recipients of our Leaders of Mental Health Awareness Awards. He's a musician and activist and all-around great guy, Matt Butler. How are you today, Matt?
Very well. Good to see you, my friend, and thank you for
Uh,
such a wonderful introduction.
well, everything's true. It's great to have you. And you are literally a leader of mental health awareness, and we're so grateful for everything that you've done. So, let's just start out. How are you doing? How are things? I know you're in New York City where things are a little hotter than they are here up in Albany. So how are you dealing with the epidemic and what's going on in the city?
Well, I would say that I'm doing pretty well. I'm keeping very busy, which I think is good to a degree. But obviously, New York is, as they say, the epicenter of this whole thing. So, um, although I wouldn't say that I'm like consistently aware of that 24 hours a day. Although one thing that I do like, I don't know if they're doing this in other parts of the country, but at 7 p.m. every night, they're like
Yeah.
people are just like going crazy. They open up their windows and clapping and shouting, and all the horns start honking on any cars that are on the street, and quite a show of solidarity.
Yeah, that's really an incredible thing. It's funny you mentioned that because I know it's funny. Our moms have met each other too. I know you like to take your mom to Alice's teacup, like I like to take my mom there. So that was really funny. She thinks she saw you there once after the conference, but that's neither here nor there. But she's in the city alone. Not too far from Alice's teacup, and she's lucky enough to have a terrace in her apartment. And when she was really struggling when this started and being isolated, and we have a new nephew that she's not able to see, and it's tough, not being able to see her grandson. And one of the things I told her to do was go out at every night at 7 o'clock and make some noise, and that's that little thing to give someone to do has really made a difference. So I'm glad that helped you as well. But
Well, I mean that's like part of New York, I think. The culture. I mean, something that I think of as comparable. I mean, I'm from New York. I grew up here, and so I was here when during 9/11, and there was like such an intense level of this sense of solidarity after that event. And I mean, this is obviously a different kind of thing. I mean, people went back to work a
right.
day or two after 9/11, and obviously people are not necessarily going back to. Not everybody's back to work yet here, but New Yorkers, like they do tend to rally in the
Yeah.
face of adversity.
And that's such an interesting thing that you bring up with 9/11, because obviously that's the closest I think any of us can compare as far as tragedy of that magnitude. And there it was like you said, going back to work was like not defiant, but defiant to the terrorists. You're not going to scare us. We're going back to work. We're going to get together again. When they had, I was talking to a hockey player a couple of weeks ago, and one of the best moments of my life was when Mike Piazza hit that game-winning home run in the first baseball game back after 9/11, like 10 days later. That was like, a sign of, like you say, resiliency and not being able to do that. And part of 9/11 too, people came together, right? And physically were together. And I'll never forget walking through the streets and you would see the missing posters all over the place. But people can console each other and be together. And that's such an interesting part of the human experience that we don't get right now. And I think that's what's
Yeah.
so hard for people. So let me ask you this then. You're someone who's been very upfront about your maintaining your mental wellness. So what type of advice would you have for people who might be struggling right now?
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the first things that I noticed about the experience of quarantine when it's funny when this first began, it kind of seems like a long time ago, like wow, back when this first happened. I remember when quarantine first started, I started to see all these posts on social media about how Shakespeare had written King Lear while like in quarantine from the
Right.
plague. And I remember thinking that I hope that people don't start putting the pressure on themselves to go and write King Lear while this is happening. Because that's where I go immediately is, I have a tremendous issue with, with needing to feel productive in order to feel good about myself. And I put a lot of pressure on. And it's actually, ironically, it's very counterproductive because the level of stress and pressure I put on myself burns me out and saps my energy and saps my creativity. So it actually, kind of works in the opposite. But I would say that, like, one of the things that has been helpful for me has been to not try to, like, force this experience to, not to put a need for it to look any one way or for me to like get something out of it or look at it too opportunistically or not to put any pressure on myself to kind of handle it in any particular manner or like I said kind of have written Born to Run by the end of quarantine or something you know but simultaneously I've been really good about keeping a certain type of discipline on my day to day, which has been really like I don't like I wake up at the same time roughly every morning, and I have like a set of morning rituals that I stick to, and then I do a lot of practicing, and I'm in school right now as well as kind of doing a full time gig, and so I have online classes, and I would say like maintaining that type of regularity is really helpful because I am the kind of guy who would like slowly drift in the sense of like, well, maybe I'll watch one more episode of this thing tonight, and then I'll end up in bed at instead of 10 o'clock, I'll go to bed by 10:45, and then the next night I'll be like, well, let me just watch a little bit of YouTube, and then I'll be in bed, I'll be asleep by 11:30, and that means I'll be getting out of bed by 7:30 or 8:30, and then extrapolate that curve a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
and then a month into quarantine. I'm waking up at 3 in the afternoon and staying up all night, which is just not good for me at all.
Right.
That is a recipe for disaster.
It's so funny. I know we have a mutual friend in Frank Shamrock, and
Yeah.
when we did the interview with him, he talked a lot about that, about keeping to your routine and staying disciplined. He kind of talks about it as like the warrior's code of,
Indeed.
expecting of yourself and not letting yourself slip. At this point, you're really competing with yourself, and
Yeah.
you kind of articulated that so well. But it's got to be tough, especially tough for you as someone who's creative and someone who's used to, interacting with audiences and getting that sort of feedback with your creativity. So obviously, the music industry has been hit very hard. Touring musicians like you, luckily you have your fingers in a lot of different pots. So you're like you say, you're going to school, you're not only being a musician, but that's gotta be very hard too, not being able to perform and tour and do what you love most, right?
Well, it's certainly an adjustment, and I would say, I mean, I'm the school I'm in music school. So I'm actually like taking classes online on, how to do sight reading and various types of music stuff that I never learned. But I have been doing virtual concerts. So I've been doing them on Zoom, and then I've been doing them on Facebook Live and various different kinds. But the experience of doing a virtual concert is obviously not the same thing as doing a real concert. But I think that like you know this has been a really interesting period of time for me, and I would say on one level I've kind of been, without realizing it, without having known it, kind of been training for this experience by over the past however many years, cultivating a certain sense of discipline or, sense of, like what Frank said, kind of a warrior's way of life and I actually relate the three concepts that I kind of relate a lot are this sort of warrior energy and then kind of a monastic experience energy or, and then an artist. So to me, a warrior and a monk and an artist are kind of like in a Venn diagram that I try to live somewhere in the middle of, and so my own fascination and experience with, with meditation and contemplation and things like that have really kind of reached new levels of experience since this has happened. Um, but I think that, things are seasonal as well, and creativity is seasonal. And I think, it's like animals are seasonal. The earth is seasonal. There's a cycle to this. There's like a real going inward that's taking place. And I think that with constriction and expansion are sort of, they're linked, like death, resurrection, transformation, rebirth. To me, this is like a season that's taking place, and then there'll be the next season afterwards.
That's a real interesting and I think healthy way to look at it. That it's kind of like this too shall pass, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we're in this dark season. I'm not a big winter person. I don't ski or get to take advantage of the winter, but sometimes I do get like seasonal depression during the winter, and you have to tell yourself the sun's going to come too. In Albany, it takes a little longer. We're supposed to get some snow tomorrow, and in May, but that's all right. We know that got to go out and take a walk through the sunshine. But for you, it's also interesting because you are a musician, like I said, and you do play clubs and you go all around. But you also have distinguished yourself by playing inside of prisons and jails and connecting to that community, which has been an amazing thing. So, and that has kind of led you into this other really great world where you're really making a big difference with your Just One Foundation, which is doing great work. And you actually have a very exciting project coming up with the release of the Mother's Day film. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. So we have a short film. It's about 9 minutes long. It's a little short documentary called Mother's Day Miracle that's coming out, and it's the story of a woman who was incarcerated, a mother who was incarcerated, and her experience of having children and being separated from them by being put in jail, and then her experience with reentry and sort of reintegrating into society, and keeping her family together and keeping herself on the right track despite the challenges that people face in those circumstances, whether they be related to stigma or economic situations. And the lady Jenny that the film is about, I performed for her in the Chesterfield County Jail in 2018 while she was incarcerated. And when she was released, she reached out on social media saying, next time you're in town, I'd like to buy you and Mario, my tour manager, I'd like to buy you guys some lunch. And we just kind of kept in touch sort of informally and found her story to be heroic, like really, really heroic. And that and the kind of heroism that I don't think is as like openly acknowledged as more obvious types of like a star athlete or whatever or something like that. And her story was so inspiring that we found ourselves back on tour going through that area, and we're like, we got to do something about this. And while we were in Chesterfield over the course of 2 or 3 days, we filmed this whole thing, and it was literally 1 year ago. So it's coming out this weekend.
It's amazing. It's just like 8-minute film, but there's so much to unpack in it, and start getting right into the heart of what Just One means. I mean, right when the film begins, she's Jenny's back in the prison, the women's prison. This time she's a free person. She's the only one not in the jumpsuit, and it is Mother's Day, and seeing the look on the other prisoners' face, or the other women's face, I don't call them prisoner, women's faces, that someone can make it. She got out. She stayed clean. She's taking care of her family. And that just one, if one person can do it, I can do it. And, that concept of just one is so important. So can you dig down on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an idea that's like kind of ancient, that you do for one, you do for all, and I think that's like a deep spiritual truth. But that idea that when you think about the context of someone's life, and all of the people that they'll encounter throughout the course of their whole experience, and the way that like just ticking the compass heading a little bit in one direction will change the nature of so many interactions, and so much outflow. And the idea that you give someone that one act of kindness or that act of generosity or that act of compassion, and then they're able to then take that to the next person, and then all of the people that they'll be, it's like the opposite of a virus, in the sense that it's like, it has that exponential growth kind of thing, but it's, you spread positivity.
Yeah. And there's so much to take out of it. I mean, obviously, Jenny's giving back in so many different ways. You see her gratitude, and when she finds out what a miracle, when her daughter, I forget, says what is a miracle, and she talks about that and finding the church and that being a way to give back to the community. But one of the things that she said, and I think it's so important for what we're all dealing with right now. I mean, obviously, so Chesterfield's in Virginia. We didn't state that. A part of Virginia that got abandoned used to be by the old highway system, which once 95 moved in, a lot of those businesses, and it was really the lifeline for that community. So drugs have taken over, and she gets out of jail, and she's in this economically depressed community, and she's still struggling. She says, it's so easy just to put your hands up and say, why not use drugs again? What do And I think for people who are struggling right now with what's going on, and the uncertainty and you don't know when this is going to end or when things are going to get better. For someone who's used to having that as a crutch, it's so easy to slide back to that. So the fact that she worked so hard to stay clean, and I think that's something a lot of people who are struggling with, who have used that before, are struggling with now. So about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that was really wonderful about where Jenny was at, personally, when she got released from jail, and she would speak to this in her own words. I'm sort of putting words in her mouth, but I think she was at a spot where she was very aware that any problem she had, using drugs again, was not going to make it better. Like it was, it would only exacerbate any problems that she had. And she, for whatever reason, had the tools and the awareness available to her at that moment in time. And then the thing that happened, which I believe, and for anybody who's listening to this that it is in a place of, some struggle, she showed up in a certain way, and she sought the kind of help that she needed, and then she saw, she thought to herself, what could she do to help others, and I do believe that it's been my own personal experience that whenever I have earnestly, and I really emphasize the word earnest, like when I meant it genuinely, but whenever I've earnestly asked for help, it's shown up for me in some kind of way. Sometimes, almost all the time, not in the way I would have necessarily wanted or expected, but Jenny asked for help and was earnest about it, and she showed up, and then she was put in the position to help others, and then that's what I think really solidified her sense of faith and purposefulness, and what allowed her to kind of push past those initial doldrums of that experience, because it can certainly feel like nothing's getting better right now, like I don't see anything changing. There's no change on the horizon. And like you said, sometimes, even though there are clouds, the sun is still shining behind those clouds, and like this too shall pass.
And I love it. Like there's that scene where she goes back in the jail, and she sees someone who had been out, but now she's back in. She goes, "What are you doing back here?" And the girl's response was, I don't know, but I don't know,
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you better figure it out, you better have an answer for that question on why you're here and what led you to slid back. I think that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. But the final thing about the movie I really want to dig down, because I found it so touching. It's like sometimes it's like such simple things, and it's something I talk about so much, that people try to measure their own personal successes and achievements compared to other people and not compared to themselves. So, the part where she's getting ready to go to work, and either she works at a pizza place or she's delivering pizza, something like that. You see her little pizza thing on, and her husband, I don't know, the boyfriend, husband, the male figure in the house, says, "I'm so proud of you." And
yeah, it's a great moment.
Pride, right? And it's something little that most of us would take for granted. I mean, maybe a lot of people now wouldn't take working as something they would take for granted, but again, delivering pizzas or whatever it is her job is might seem menial to somebody, but for her, that was a pride. She was making an honest living, and she was working. And I thought that moment of pride was just such a beautiful thing. And I think people forget to look at their own achievements a lot. So that's something you can.
I mean, well, I certainly know what it's like to compare myself to other people. That's something that I'm intimately familiar with. And
right, in your line of work, obviously, being a musician, it's such a competitive.
For sure, but I think I think it's just natural to some degree, and I think that, like, if I were not a musician, but if I were, doing anything else, if I was I used to, before I was a full-time musician, I worked as a writer at a advertising agency. If I were doing that, I'd be comparing myself to other writers, or to, what assignment does he have, or what agency is he working for? If I worked for, I mean, the mechanism of comparison, it exists, but yeah, I think with music, there's some obvious ways to do it, but I also think that, like, we kind of like live in a culture that makes it really easy to do as well, to compare oneself, and I think we do kind of rob ourselves of some joy and some satisfaction by doing that on a regular basis. And no one's path is the same, so any comparison you're making, with yourself and somebody else is just by nature a rigged game. It's like you can't do it. It's not possible. People are all different. We've all got our own unique paths through the world. So there's no fairness or reality in that. And I think that, if anything, sometimes I think about myself in comparison to, like, who I was like a year ago, or who I was, and I think the idea of trying to be a better version, or a more mature, or more whatever version of oneself is as close to like a an accurate sort of, or productive form of self-appraisal as is possible. But in the situation in the film, she was just really dead on at that point as far as what was important in life. It was like a great thing, as it captured her at that moment in time, where she had this sort of radical reassessment of what's valuable, what her values were. And I think that's kind of what's going on to a degree with the pandemic as well. So I think people are being forced to reassess what's really meaningful. And she was at that point where she's like, my father and I talked about the film, and he was really moved by it. And he talked about the end where she's like, Saturday morning, I get to have breakfast with my kids. And that was that was it. That was, and in reality, that is the kind of thing that's truly important. And I think we tend to kind of drift from that. Mm. And the film captured her at just such a wonderful moment, where she was just so centered as far as those kinds of ideas go. She just was tapped into what was really important to her.
Yeah. So obviously, if now we've been talking about this film, I hope we've gotten people excited by it. Like I said, it's very powerful. You can watch it by going to the Just One Foundation's website.
Yeah, so it's going to be available this weekend on j1foundation.org, and it'll also be posted on social media. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on Instagram TV, things like that.
And we'll have a link, when we email out this episode, and on the YouTube episode, the description, so people can just click there and see all the fantastic work Matt is doing with the Just One Foundation, and really watch this powerful film, because it's amazing how much you can cover in 8 minutes. I mean, we're sitting here unpacking it, and there's so many lessons to learn. There's so
much footage. It was so hard to cut it down to that. Yeah. We wanted to make it, we wanted to keep it under 10 minutes to keep it sort of accessible and, proper for the medium of Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and stuff forth. But it could have been a movie, man. It could have been, it could have been a film at that point. And there's certainly the story itself could easily be a film. It was difficult to edit. There
I'm
were
sure.
some darlings that didn't get to make it into the final cut.
Hopefully, maybe one day there'll be a director's cut because there's really just so much to learn.
If you talk to Sam about Sam Hobbystow, who directed the film, he would say that there will be a director's cut at some point. It's funny. He's actually a friend of mine. We went to high school together, so the experience has been a great reunion for us. We used to make like student films together back in 11th grade, and he, that's what he did. He grew up, and now he's a freelance editor and videographer, and we managed to reconnect on this side of things, and it's been really cool.
That's awesome. So, I can't let you go, of course, without playing a song. And I've already asked you to play one of my favorites, but I think before you even get to it, the last thing that you said in talking about Jenny's story, that Saturday morning with the kids and how that's everything in the world to her. And again, something that we would take for granted. I think now people don't take it for granted so much. I mean, we're actually recording this the Friday before Mother's Day. It's coming out next week, but not being able to be with my mom on Mother's Day, this weekend. And, I'm sure that's something that a lot of families are struggling with, and the importance of home. And really my favorite song by you is Home for Good. I think, it's such a powerful song. And I remember when you played it at the conference this year, I asked you what home in the song meant, what was home? Because there's so much I identify with that song of, growing up in the city and you paint such a vivid picture, but that feeling of being lost, like emotionally lost. And I've been there. I talk openly. Most of my 20s, I was lost in this bad headspace. And what is home? When you find that safety, and obviously now that's a little redefined for a lot of people, home for good, but can you talk about like what the meaning of the song is?
Yeah. I remember when you asked that question, and that was sort of like, it's interesting because you can know something like, in my heart, I know what that song is when I perform it and I put it out, but I never really had been put in the position to try to articulate it. So it was actually a really kind of interesting experience and experiment for me to define what that was. And I think that, in the context of that song, and one of the conclusions that I arrived at the conference, was that home represented living a good and honest life in that kind of way, and or finding, truth and love in one's life. The story of that song, it's kind of one of these like cliffhangery songs where you don't really know what the song ends, and you kind of don't know which direction the narrator's going to go in, and whether what does home for good mean? Is he still just saying he's coming home, or is he actually coming home? And to me, home is that sense of rootedness and foundation, and that sense of being loved unconditionally, the sense of feeling, a belonging and a place. Like, I think that one of the feelings that has predominated my whole existence, my whole life, I've struggled with the feeling that the world had no place for me. I was like this extra thing, that was really just a drain, just here to be a drain on people and things, to just kind of like take and consume. But there was no place that I really belonged, a sense of purposelessness. And to me, coming home is like finding that sense of purpose and that sense of belonging again, that maybe you have to remember, or maybe even feel for the first time.
Yeah, well, I so relate to that. And just to kind of bring both of our stories together, I mean, like I said, I spent way too much of my life feeling that same exact way, feeling, a drain and just a waste of space. I mean, however you want to say it. And but now, you feel like you spend so much time taking, and now both of us are being able to give back, and how good that feeling is to help, like you say, you're helping just one, and If I get one piece of good, someone tells me the show helped them or the work I've done has helped them, that makes it all worth it. And that's a good place to call home, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That sense of being able to be helpful. And that's something that, just to say quickly about any show, but especially when I first started playing the prison shows, I would say that to myself walking in, that I'm like, as intimidated as I was, especially in the beginning, but I would say to myself, if one person gets something out of this, it was worth doing, and I feel that way today, and I wake up in the morning and try. There's the words I try to live by.
Yeah, that's the good words to live by, and then maybe we'll now just let the song speak for itself.
Yeah.
All right.
Which one do you want to hear? Home for Good or just one?
Home for Good, if you don't mind.
No, it's your favorite.
It is my favorite.
Let's do it. The way I've played this song has really evolved over the years too. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, of course. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Well, I was killing some time, just drinking down at Sophie's. I told my girl I'd be home in a little while, when this dude swung in with his Jameson grin. He said, boy, I bet I know your style. He said, I ain't selling it cheap, 'cause man, I gotta eat, but I got some blow that you really need to try. Yeah, so I checked my phone, and I knew my girl was home alone. Hell, it's just a little line. Oh yeah, but heaven knows if there's one promise I've kept, still got my mother's St. Christopher hanging around my neck. And Lord knows I don't know why I don't do what I should. I swear I mean it every time I say I'm coming home. I'm coming home for good. Ooh. I'm coming home for good. Yeah. All right, Matt. Now I've been up all night, dragged myself across the Bowery with my boots barely hanging from my feet. Oh, when the sun burned bright, oh, as I stumbled across the mission into a man begging change in the heat. He said, you look just like my boy, and you remind me of myself, a jean jacket rock and roller in his prime. Yeah, I ain't trying to score, no, I'm just trying to get some help. And I thought, man, this must be some kind of sign. Well, oh yeah, but heaven knows if there's one promise I've kept, still got my mother St. Christopher hang around my neck. And Lord knows I don't know why I don't do what I should. I swear I mean it every time I say I'm coming home. I'm coming home for good. Ooh. Coming home for good. Yeah. All right. I turned my back and I stumbled round the corner, past the folks standing in the methadone line. And then it all turned black but you know I still remember. I couldn't shake the feeling I was running out of time. Heaven knows if there's one promise I've kept, still got my mother St. Christopher hanging around my neck. And Lord knows I don't know why I don't do what I should. I swear I mean it every time I say I'm coming home. I'm coming home for good. Ooh. Coming home for good. Yeah, that's it now. All right.
Oh, that was, I can't thank you enough. Oh, that was great. I almost had to mute myself so I wasn't harmonizing with you there, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I love that song, and you know, I hope by watching today, you know, you've really inspired people. Now that we are all kind of home for what seems like good, that you make yourselves a good home, and that starts with making yourself good. And you know, we all struggle with stuff like you talk about, but you know, it's all up to us to take care of ourselves, take care of our home, and make sure when we are home that we're really home for good. So Matt, I can't thank you enough for all that you do, for being such an inspiration, for, you know, sharing your talents with NAMI. I know you've helped so many people. You know, when I first met you, as you know, there was someone very close to me who was struggling with issues. I heard you play. I'm sitting there with tears coming down my eyes, and you know, I had you sign the CD to them, and I sent them with a really long letter. And you know, when you talk about helping just one, you help somebody very close to me, and I can never thank you enough for that, and never thank you enough for being such a great friend to NAMI, for doing this. So, you know, again, please, people, you can check out mattbutler.com if you want to learn, right? Mattbutler.com for
Matt Butler's song.
Matt Butler songs. We'll have a link to that as well. And Just One Foundation will have a link to learn more about the fantastic work Matt's doing. So Matt, again, just thank you so much for being a part of this.
My pleasure, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. And thank you so much for watching. We hope you learned a lot today, and you know, hopefully help keep your home nice and tidy. And as we say with everything around NAMI, hope starts with you. So thank you, and we'll see you next time on NAMI New York State Perspectives.
Indeed.